Hey, how's it going? It's Lee Halliday, and today we are going to publish our own package to NPM. I had never published one, and a couple weeks ago, I finally got around to creating my first NPM package. It's this use supercluster hook to be used in React that will help you basically use supercluster, which is all about clustering markers in React. None of that matters for this video, but I wanted to basically show how I figured out how to publish my first package. Mine is obviously not a massive hit so far, maybe later, who knows. But I found this really cool package from Jared Palmer. He's the same guy behind Formic, the great React form package. And what TSDX does is it basically helps you configure and publish a package, an NPM package, with TypeScript, with sort of all of the tons of work you'd have to do to configure it correctly so that it gets compiled properly with parcel and TypeScript and all of that config stuff. He basically takes care of that for us, which is pretty fantastic. So if we go into the command line, we're just going to basically walk through creating our own React hook, testing it, publishing it up, versioning it, and publishing a new version. And we'll see how to do that from start to finish in what I hope will be about 15 minutes. So we will start off, we have to install globally TSDX. So you would hit enter now. I've already done it, so I'm just going to sort of skip to the next step. So once TSDX is installed globally, we can run it. And we'll run it with create. And next thing that comes up is your package name. So I'm going to create a hook called use toggle. That probably exists, so I'm just going to call it use toggle E to make it unique. And when you do that, it asks you a question. Do you want a basic NPM package? So this would be, basic means non-React, sort of just JavaScript on its own. You can do React, or you can do React with Storybook. We're just going to do React for this one. So it will install for us a number of packages. This will take a minute, but the great thing is it sort of sets up all of the files, the test file, the TypeScript configs, the package.json, sort of all of the stuff that you'd have to do by hand, figuring out all the formats and how do I compile this thing. It takes care of all of that for us, so it's pretty easy to get up and running. So once it's finished, we can cd into the folder, so switch to that directory, and we will open it with VS Code. So what it gives us, we'll just start at the top. We've got a dist folder. You never really work in here yourself. This is sort of, it's taken your code that's going to be written in source, and it builds it and it outputs it to this dist folder. It gives you an example folder if you want to build your own example to publish with your package. And other than that, it gives you the start of some tests you can write, and then it sets up all of the things you'd have to do. So set up your license, your git ignore correctly, your package.json, and even if TSDX only gave us this is great that we don't have to figure out all of this stuff ourselves. tsconfig sets up things in a great way for us, etc. So we're going to be building a simple little hook called use toggle, and we'll just start from scratch in this file. So the first thing we want to do is we will import use state from React, because that is something that we're going to use in our hook to keep track of if the toggle is true or false. And I will just export a default function called use toggle. And we won't pass anything into it. It's probably not the best toggle, but it's just a demo, right? So what our toggle will have, it is some state. So it will have sort of the current value of our toggle and the function to change that value. And we'll start it off as false. So if you were building this for real, you might want to let your user choose whether it starts off as false or true, but ours is always false. So this hook, it returns the value. And then instead of returning set value, which would require our user to have to figure out what's the opposite of my current value, we will return a function that just calling this function will automatically toggle this value back and forth. So we'll call the set value to change the state, and set value actually gives us a callback. So we can just say, let's take the current value and take the opposite of that, the not. Just to start to set up our TypeScript correctly. So what does this return? It returns an array where the first value can be true or false, and the second value is a function which returns nothing, so void. So with that in place, that's basically the code. This is our package. You call it, and you get a value you can toggle back and forth. So why don't we go and test this now? So I'm going to rename this, instead of blah, we're going to be testing the index file. And why don't we basically start from scratch? So we will import React from React. And how do we have access to React? First of all, we have access to React because when we chose sort of the template that we're going to use, TSDX pre-installed sort of everything we need to get started with that template. And I guess that's the first thing to jump into when you're creating a package. There's actually 3 types of dependencies. We'll start with the main type, and there's actually none of them. So that would be your dependencies, where you've got sort of all of the dependencies you need for this package. We don't have anything here because apart from React, there's nothing else going on in this package that needs to be installed alongside this package automatically in order for this to work once the user installs it into their app. So there's nothing here in the dependencies attribute of our package.json file. So we have a number of dev dependencies. These are all the dependencies required to create this application. So this is where we have all our TypeScript types, where we have React, and where we have TSDX and TypeScript and all of that stuff. None of this needs to be installed automatically when the user installs our package. It's just used to develop it. There's one other type of dependencies, and that is a peer dependency. So this is something the user is required to have, but we won't install it automatically for them. It's sort of up to them to install this package. And typically you'd use this when you're creating, say, a plugin for something else. So because we're creating a hook, it's sort of always going to be used paired with React. So we'll let the user install that themselves and control what version of React they're doing. But we basically define here, you need React as a peer dependency in order to use ours correctly, because we're assuming that you have React installed. Notice you also need React down here in the dev dependency, because we need React as we're developing it and testing our hook. So if we go back into our test, I'm actually going to be writing a test using React testing library. So I need to go down to the command line and install that. So we'll do yarn add. We want to put it in the dev dependencies, and we'll do testing-library React, and we'll also add testing library, and it's called Jest DOM. And what we're going to be testing is basically when it renders a component and they use our useToggle hook, does it correctly toggle the state back and forth and display a div in the DOM, in the document. So we'll add these packages, and we can confirm that they're put inside of the, while that's finishing up, we'll go back to package. So it should be putting these into the dev dependencies, which it did. Again, these aren't anything the user needs to use. These are just things we'll use when developing it. So now we can come back here and we can import whatever we need from React testing library. So we need a function called render, and we also need one called wait for element, because things happen asynchronously in this toggle code we're writing. So that comes from testing library React, and we are also going to import from testing library Jest DOM extend expect. This is just something that gives us the ability to check if an element, if a node is in the document, so it will help us as we're testing React. So what is the thing we of course need to import? We need to actually import our useToggle function. So we will import use toggle from, and we'll access it locally, so use source. Because it's the index file, you don't need to actually put /index. It sort of just assumes and it knows where to grab it. So with that in place, we can remove this and start to write our test. So we're going to create a fake sort of component for testing called app, and it will just be a functional component. And inside of this functional component, we will use our use toggle hook. So use toggle returns us back sort of the current value of the toggle, and it returns us a function to toggle this value back and forth. And that all comes from use toggle. And so what we'll do is we'll say if there's a value, return a div that says yes, and else we will return null. So we only render something if it's toggled to true. So it should fail at this point because use toggle starts at false and it will return null, but we're going to basically look for this yes in here. So to use a React testing library, what we'll do is we'll say, for now empty object, but we'll say render the app component. And when you do this, you get a few functions back you can call. We're going to use getByText, which is a function to basically find nodes by their text value. So with that in place, we want to basically wait for this element to see when it's in the DOM. So we'll call this what we're waiting for is the yes node, basically this div here. And we need to await wait for element. And to this function, you pass a function that's basically going to be constantly trying over and over again to find that element until it finally finds it or it gives up after like 5 seconds. So we will call getByText and we will be looking for yes, like that. So it's giving me an error, await. So we need to make this an async function. And once we've done that, we can write our actual test. So we expect the yes node to be in the document, like that. Cool. So if we run our test, we'll just clear the page with Command K on a Mac, and we write yarn test. Okay, so I tested this before recording this video, and I got the same error, so I knew it. So if you see this error, watch is not supported without get HD or HG. We can just init this Git repository. For whatever reason, doing this allows us to run the command. So now we can run yarn test again. And it's waiting for that element to appear. And it's actually giving us a TypeScript error, first of all. But the test failed. So it's saying, hey, you brought in this toggle function, but you never called it. So why don't we go and try to make this test pass now? So what I'm going to do is basically use a useEffect hook to run something once after the DOM has rendered for the first time. So empty brackets is what will cause that to happen. And we will call toggle. So this will basically render once, it will trigger the effect, that will toggle it, which should toggle it into the true state. And now that if value should be true, and it will return the div, and that should allow our wait for element to find the element, and then it will be in the document. So if we go back, awesome, it's actually passing, so it renders without crashing. We could say it toggles, because that's what we're doing. So at this point, our tests are passing. This is probably when you'd commit it and you'd push it to your GitHub. I'm not going to be doing this because this isn't a real package I want to really publish and have everywhere, but that's what you would do at this point. Now, the package.json, there's a number of things that you could add to here that don't get added automatically by TSDX. So if you go to the web and look at my package.json, I added a few things. For example, the location of the repository, what's the home page of this package, what are some keywords that show up. And all of these things get displayed to the user when you're viewing the package page. For example, the home page is here, the repository. If you go down to the bottom, you see all these keywords I added. And all of this stuff right in the middle, sort of the main information about your package, that comes from the README. So this is where you would go into the README. You would maybe say it's a use toggle package, and you'd give examples of how to install it, how to use it, etc. We'll just say just a demo because that's what it is. So we're happy with it. We're going to publish version 0.1.0 of this thing. So we just come down to the command line, and we're going to run the command yarn publish. So what it's going to ask you is the version you want to install when it gets pushed to NPM. We're fine with 0.1.0, so we hit enter. So now it's running the build, and this is something from TSDX, and what it's doing at this point is it's basically generating all of the files in this dist. This is what actually gets used by somebody when they install your package and they import it. It doesn't use sort of the ES6 version. It uses whatever version, let's see, CJS production min. It uses this like compressed version. That might not even be it. It might be this one. I don't know. It uses one of these versions, but it's not all super fancy. It uses one that will be available to the most people. So if we come down here, it didn't ask me for my login, but I should mention that. In order to publish a package, you need an account on NPM. So you need to create that. And the first time you run this command, it will ask you to authenticate as this user. So it should be done at this point. So use toggle EEE should be available on NPM. So if I go into my packages here, I now have two. So I've got the use supercluster one, and I've got use toggle EEE that I just pushed. It's got my README. I never added a Git repo or anything like that, but it's set up. Somebody could find use toggle EEE and add it and use it. Let's say we now need to make a change. So whatever, even could be as small as the README. It's up to you. So let's say we add an example. So comment example here. So we're done. We want to bump the version. Versioning follows semver. So if you're not familiar with that, I'll link to an article that will talk a little bit about semver and point you in the right direction. Let's say we're just doing like a tiny sort of bump release here. You should be able to upgrade to the new version and your app will work the same. It's like a bug fix or just something minor. Whereas the middle one, sort of you're adding new features or changes, but it shouldn't be any breaking changes. And the biggest one would be for breaking changes. So if you bump the big number, whoever's using it is expecting that they may have to change their app in order for it to work correctly. So we've bumped it to 0.1.1. We can just come back down and yarn publish a new version. So it's asking us, do you want 0.1.1? Yes. It's going to build it, and then it's going to push that new version up to NPM. So as soon as that finishes up, it should now be live. So if I refresh, it's now at 0.1.1. We can see we've got two versions, so we can go back and look at the previous version to this one. And it now is showing us our example here. So that's the video. That's what I wanted to cover today. It's basically how to start from nothing, use TSDX to kick off a new NPM package that you're going to push up to npmjs.com. But it does all the configuration for you, all the TypeScript stuff, the building and the roll-up and the parcel and all that stuff that, frankly, I don't want to figure out myself. I just want to publish this sweet use toggle hook. So we wrote our hook, and we tested our hook, and then we published this up. I never pushed it to GitHub. As you could see, that actually isn't required to publish a package, but you'd probably want to push up your code somewhere as well. And that's it. Take care, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.